Hello and welcome to this USCCB Roundtable. In October 2023, the Bishops' Conference launched the National Catholic Mental Health Campaign. Its goal has been to inspire a national conversation and to mobilize a compassionate and effective response. Today we have our third in a series of roundtables about the mental health crisis in this country. With us today to discuss challenges to family life are Bishop James Conley of the Diocese of Lincoln, John Cadwallader, a licensed clinical psychologist, and Virginia Madden, a licensed professional counselor. I'm your moderator, Mara Moser. Thank you, Bishop Conley, John, and Virginia for joining us today. Bishop, I'd like to start with you. You wrote a pastoral letter about your own mental health journey. I see you have copies of it here with you, A Future with Hope. Could you talk about what led you to write this pastoral letter?
Sure, happy to, and thanks for putting this together. It's a privilege to be with all of you. My own story, in which this pastoral letter, which I published in May of this last year during Mental Health Awareness Month, the month of May in 2024. I wanted to tell my story, my own journey and struggles in the area of mental health, but also then offer some sort of resource for people and hope for a future. That that there are a lot of people around this table, especially, that can help us. So I didn't have really any mental health history. I didn't have any trauma in my childhood. I didn't have anything that you can. Oftentimes, mental health struggles can be traced back to childhood trauma and things like that. I didn't have anything like that. I was really kind of a very stable family. Mom and Dad were married for almost 60 years. I didn't grow up as Catholic, so I converted during my college years, but my parents were very good Christians. They instilled in us good Christian values. My father came out of the Great Generation, World War II, was a gunner on an aircraft carrier, played professional baseball, and so I kind of had a really good, stable childhood. And my troubles kind of came about through, I guess you would say, stress of my position as a bishop. And it was really towards 2018, 2019, kind of the burdens of the leadership became really, really intense in a lot of ways. The normal things that bishops have to do, or anybody that's sort of in a position of leadership, but also, if you remember, that was when the 2018 was when the sexual abuse crisis really kind of exploded again. First it was 2002 when the horrific stories came out about this terrible tragedy in the church, and we began to deal with it really in a new way. And then in 2018, the McCarrick scandal was broken, and then the Pennsylvania grand jury report came out in that summer of 2018. And then at the same time, I was dealing with some issues in my own diocese. With regard to clergy misconduct. We had the Attorney General in the state of Nebraska had an investigation of all three dioceses. We had to turn over all of our personnel files from going back to 1940. So there was the pressure of that, and the fears that kind of around not knowing what we have in our past, that happened before I ever came to the Diocese of Lincoln. And then in addition to that, I had a lot of other things happen. Like a couple of schools were failing. We ended up closing 2 schools, which was very traumatic. My sister was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer. A young priest died suddenly. All these things kind of combined to be really a stressful time, and I don't think I really realized it. So in the fall of 2018, I really was starting to notice that I was preoccupied with all these worries, sort of ruminating over everything, and not sleeping, which I didn't realize. And so the first thing in my story was just lack of sleep. So I went days, weeks, months without getting a good night's rest, because I was going through all these scenarios in my head, trying to figure out, I'm the bishop, so I got to fix all this stuff, right? And so how can I fix this, and how can I fix that? And I would just go through the night, case after case, situation after situation, in my head, trying to figure it out, not realizing that I wasn't sleeping. So after about 4 or 5 months of that, in the spring of 2019, my sister, said, "You look terrible. Are you okay? You haven't slept." And I said, "No, I've got a lot of stress. I'll get through this." And I came out of that generation too, where my dad, he said, "If it's tough, you just work harder, or pray harder. You're going to get through this. You just tough it out, white knuckle it." And so that was that was in my DNA. Okay, I can do this. I'm a bishop. God's given me this position, so I'm going to get through this stuff. I'm just going to work hard. So I finally, in the spring, I was realizing that not only was I not sleeping, but I was anxious and I was fearful and I was getting depressed. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so I went to the Mayo Clinic, which was very smart. I have some friends. I'm also the National Episcopal Advisor to the Catholic Medical Association, so I know a lot of physicians. I had a couple good friends at the Mayo Clinic. Went up there, had a full physical, was diagnosed with anxiety and major depressive disorder. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. That was kind of a relief. And now I know why I'm feeling so terrible, and so I needed to, see a doctor, get on medication, a psychologist, get into therapy, and a psychiatrist. And so I did all those things and started along that path of recovery, which was good for a while. But into the summer and into the fall of 2019, I was, at a certain level, but not really making much progress. I was still trying to figure all this stuff. And the stressors and the pressure had not gone away. I was still in the job, really trying to deal with all these things. And then I finally got to the point, it was again my sister, my closest friend, Archbishop Paul Conley, who's the Archbishop of Oklahoma City. We were on the same baseball team in the 7th grade. My dad was the coach, so he knows me like nobody else. And he said, "Yeah, you're just not doing well. I think maybe you ever thought about taking some time off?" I said, "Can bishops do that?" Didn't think you could, And so finally I said, "No, I talked to my spiritual director, and I said, I just need to get out of this situation. Get to someplace. We were going into the winter. I need to go someplace warm and sunny and just kind of just rest." So I went to the bishops' meeting in November of 2019, and I talked to the Apostolic Nuncio, who's my superior, representing our Holy Father, and I told him, I'm not functioning very well. I just don't think I can, I need to take some time off, and is that possible? And he looked at me and he said, "Yeah, you don't look very good." He said, "Yeah, you need some rest. You need to get some rest." He was like a father. He really did say, "No, well, I'll talk to the Holy Father about this and see if this is possible." So about 3 weeks later, I got a call and said, "Yes, you can take a leave. We'll have the Archbishop of Omaha take over the diocese as the apostolic administrator, and you can get some rest." So I ended up going to Phoenix. My former bishop, Bishop Olmsted, was the bishop there. And I have also a lot of friends that were former students of mine, families there, and I knew some priests there, so it was a good place. He put me in a little kind of a retreat center, where retired priests live, and I had a little casita there and at the base of Camelback Mountain, and so that's where I went in December of 2019. So I like to say, I took a leave of absence for health reasons in December of 2019, and then the whole world took a leave of absence in March of 2020. Right. Mm-hmm. Which, added a whole nother layer, because I was out of my familiar surroundings, I was awake, isolated, and then everything became isolated. Mm-hmm. There was the distancing, and there was this lockdown, and all these kind of things. And thanks be to God, I had these families who were students of mine when I was chaplain at the University of Dallas at the Rome campus for about 6.5 years, and had hundreds of students come through. And they had gone and graduated and gotten married and had families of their own, and they just sort of took me into their families. Mm-hmm. And during the lockdown, especially when Mass wasn't being celebrated at the parish, I had permission to say Mass privately. And so the families loved it. Because they didn't have to live stream their masses, and had the kids all there because they were out of school, and so that was huge. And I also had a good psychotherapist, and I had a good medical doctor who was one of the leading doctors with the COVID pandemic down in Phoenix. I had a very good spiritual director, and I had a good psychiatrist who was also a board member with me on the Catholic Medical Association. So I was very blessed to have a lot of resources. Mm-hmm. But I'd have to say, so I went through that time, and I didn't know how long I'd be gone. I mean, I thought maybe it'd be a couple months and I'd be back on the job, but I was out for 11 months. Wow. And it really took that long to recover. And I eventually came back, and my psychotherapist said, before you go back, it'd be good for you to shadow another bishop. So I went down to Oklahoma City and spent a month with Archbishop Conley, shadowing him, and I was in Kansas City, where I grew up, with Archbishop Naumann. Both of them were wonderful. Let me, kind of walk around with them and help them with confirmations and things like that. And then it was in November of 2020 that I came back. It was 11 months. So I left on December 13th and came back November 13th. So I was gone 11 months. And that first year back was bumpy and rocky, and still on a lot of medications, and I was still sort of fragile. But I had an opportunity to go on a retreat with the Healing the Whole Person retreat with Dr. Bob Schutz at the John Paul II Institute and Healing Center. And then I also continued in therapy, and the second year back, well, as soon as I got back, another big blow, my mother passed away in December of 2020 to COVID. And so that was really kind of another thing that rocked me, because we were so very close, and my father had already passed away. But as I kind of made my way back and continued to get help with those people around me, and to stay close with these families, I kind of got better and got more traction in 2022 and then 2023. And then each year since then I've gotten better and better. And so that's sort of in a nutshell kind of my story. And I'm off all medication, thanks be to God. But I continue to see my therapist from time to time. We check in. I'm very serious about spiritual direction. I see my spiritual director once a month, and so that's where I am today.
Yeah, and thank you so much for writing the letter, A Future with Hope. I think it talks about your journey, but also the issues that we're experiencing as a nation. And I'd like to ask John and Virginia what you're seeing in your practices and how it resonates with the story you've just heard from Bishop Conley.
Yeah, what I noticed was the lack of rest. You were so tired and burnt out, and I see that a lot in the families that I work with as well. The parents are burnt out, the kids are overscheduled. You also mentioned that community was really healing for you. People don't live in community anymore, and people will try to live in community, and they'll struggle to find other families or individuals who want to live in community. So those were two things that really stuck out to me.
I think that's a great point, and part of it is of where culturally we're so busy, I think in Western culture, where whether it be extracurriculars or just demands at school or things like that too, and some of it's family obligations. I have a lot of appreciation and admiration for young people, because I think it is hard to be young. I mean, when I was younger, maybe when you were younger, Bishop, it's kind of the thing of where you would know what your friends are doing if you called them or you saw them at school. I mean, children being bombarded with information, I think, in that regard too, and it does become something which is very stressful.
I have to make mention of this book I read this summer. You've probably heard of The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and he talks about this very thing, that all these demands on young people, and he makes this beautiful contrast between a screen-based childhood and a play-based childhood. And in the screen-based childhood, most of your time is spent in the screen world, right? In the virtual world. Disembodied, exactly, in your own head, basically. I remember Chris Stefanik, who's a good friend and is a speaker, talks about, the mind is a very scary place. It's like the woods. You don't want to go in there alone. And it's true. They're alone in their own minds. And with social media and all these things that are, this information that's coming at them 24/7, all kinds of ideas, and they're kind of maturing and going through puberty and all that kind of time of life where everything is kind of up in the air, and it just causes all kinds of anxiety and stress. And then the play, they don't have an opportunity to have this real encounter where it's unstructured, unplanned kind of play that they need to be able to discover real things. I also think it's a lack of contact with reality. They don't have real friendships, real things, being outdoors, being in neighborhoods, being in with their friends, that kind of thing, I think, is having an effect.
Yeah, and if you're a parent who doesn't want a lot of screen time, it may be hard to find other children for your children to play with because everybody else is on screen. So we really have to, as a culture, shift towards a return to play.
And he mentions this too in the book. He talks about, when he's talking about parents, is you need to find other parents who also realize there's a problem here. So, so you're not the only one. You're not the crazy person on the block that's, the kids are outside playing all the time. You got to find other families that say, yeah, we need to band together so we can build a community of people who are like-minded and who see these challenges and can help you support what you're doing.
It is so hard because, to your point, for young people, it's very hard for them to be in the here and now. They want to be in the there and then or somewhere else. And there's an intolerance, I think, in some ways of just being still. And this, of where if you go into the chapel and there's, it's you and Jesus, there's nobody there. Or if you're going for a walk, how noisy I think our minds are in many ways too, how we're so preoccupied, with a lot of thoughts or concerns of where it just seems normal for us. And it becomes something which really, washes over us. And I think with the anxiety of children and what they're experiencing, a lot of times parents are anxious too. And that children will go to their parents and want to talk about whatever concerns. And parents may be well-intentioned, but it's like, just a minute, honey, and kind of going through the phone. Or it's, other kinds of obligations they have too. Children unintentionally begin to learn that they have to bear all this, I think, unfortunately, alone, which isn't always true. But I think it speaks to really the mental health of parents too, which is the greatest gift they can give to their children. Are they well? Do they take care of themselves?
Mm-hmm. And they model by their own behavior. If they're always on their phones, I have to ask myself that too. If I'm if I'm always looking at my phone, well, that's sending a signal to everybody else. Well, it's okay to be on your phone when you're with other people. And I think parents don't realize that. It's become so much a part of us that so kids pick that up.
Yeah, and that's something you talked about in your letter as well, was not only the lack of sleep, but the lack of exercise that began to kind of encroach on your life, where you are a runner and you no longer ran as much.
Right, yeah, just those normal things. Diet, what you're eating. Are you eating regularly? Are you eating good food? That kind of thing. All these, the whole person, it comes into play. And you mentioned the bombardment of information and data coming to us all the time. I think it was Blaise Pascal said the problem with modern man is his inability to sit alone with his own thoughts in his room. Mm-hmm. And he said, and that's true. If we ask, how long can I sit alone in the room by myself? And and boredom comes in. And another one, I'll throw out another name, Arthur Brooks, who's at the Harvard Business School, who's written a lot on boredom and the brain science. And he's saying, actually, boredom is a good thing. Mm-hmm. Parents, I think, are afraid, I'm bored, Mom, what am I going to do? Well, here, take the tablet, whatever. But that's where creativity comes. And to face that boredom in your life and to be imaginative. Kids can make things up. They can take care of that boredom by figuring out what to do, play games, imagine, those kinds of things. But boredom is not a bad thing. And I think parents are afraid to if their kids get bored, they got to keep them active, right?
It reminds me of a quote from Mr. Rogers that talked about creative play begins with silence. Yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah.
John, I know you had a special interest in kind of the media that children are consuming and its effect on mental health. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
I do. And one thing to mention, I think, that's so important of where, again, we talked about how technology can be good. I think it's something where, sadly, a lot of bad things come through technology, and I think one of which is pornography. It's something where I've had to have a lot of conversations with our kids when they're younger that I could have never thought I would imagine I've actually had to say, to my kids, where, to be aware of that, to where YouTube is one of the things that young people watch the most, and how a lot of those kinds of videos are actually in those feeds, and where they may be looking for something that's very innocent, and the importance of parents actually being able to talk about that. I read estimates of where young people are first introduced to pornography, ages 11 to 12, and I've read some even as young as age 7. And I think that, as we talked about deformation, that objectification, what people begin to experience, because, their conscience, they know there's something about this that is bad, but then there's still something which it could be enticing, I think, in some ways too, or some of that could be curiosity. Some of that could just be their peers and what they're introduced to. And it becomes something which is very dangerous, certainly as far as sin, but it also creates this sense of an unhealthy substitute they're not getting loved by their parents. They're not being loved by their family, their closest friends. They're not talking to God about this too. They tend to go to these creature comforts, which actually makes it much worse.
Right. And they have trouble developing healthy relationships as they mature.
They do, in particular that time as far as just their brains forming. It starts to create a lot of dangerous things down the road in terms of how relationships are viewed. This could be something where women, later begin to feel this sense of devaluation, that they're not good because they're not this idealized kind of experience. Or more typically men with pornography and things like that too, of how they may look at wives or women in a way that's more of an extension of them. They don't see their intrinsic goodness that actually exists.
Yeah, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures is a great resource because children need to know, even if they have a great relationship with their parents, they need to have an idea of what to do when they're exposed to this content. So giving kids kind of, safety plans for what to do. And then, also just monitoring what your kids are doing online. I would not let my kid go free on YouTube until they're, responsible and maybe a late elementary at the earliest. Even if you're in YouTube Kids, you never know what could pop up.
Yeah, that Good Pictures, Bad Pictures resource I was first exposed to as part of the Virtus training.
Yeah.
And as a way to kind of protect your child from predatory adults or child abuse, which I found very interesting.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. It's going to happen. I think that's one of the things parents have to realize. They're going to find it. And so what are you going to do with that? How are you going to explain to what is going on here? Why is this happening? And to see really the reality of the sadness of what that is. This is not really the beauty that God has intended for our bodies and love and sexuality, and to kind of help them see that this is distortion of it. And this is a very sad thing, and it's not something, to be able, like you said, to be able to talk to them about it. That's where it's going to be hard for parents because they never have had to be able to have to talk about it so directly, but you have to.
Children are already uncomfortable with these topics, regardless of how you've introduced that. I think the more comfortable, at least on the outside, that parents can be with that puts the child a little bit more at ease. I think there's less of a sense of shame that I can't bring this up, because we do want children to be able to go to their parents, even if they accidentally stumble across something.
Exactly, and if the parents freak out, that's going to make it harder for them to go back to the parents later on. So it's very important for us parents to be calm. And if we're not calm when our children tell us something upsetting, to just acknowledge that and say we're going to try better, do better.
You're right, because I think if the parents, you're going to naturally have your own reactions, which is important. It just means you're alive, right? Yeah. But some of it is this sense of how do they try and be present, for the child, and then later they have more this sense of maybe they're going to their husband or wife, or they're praying or otherwise too, to receive their own connection or consolation. Because when children see parents collapse, then what are they going to do next time?
That's very scary.
They're going to keep it to themselves, because the fear is that whatever I've said or done is so bad, it's destroyed my parents.
Well, I would like to to wrap up, talk about what human flourishing in a Catholic worldview looks like. I know you talk a little bit about this in your letter. Would you like to kind of open it up for us? Human flourishing.
Well, I think one good thing, a lot of good things, but I think one thing that I'm very hopeful about is more and more people you talk about the stigma, more and more people are talking about mental health issues, more and more people are realizing that we need to talk about it. Look at the NFL Football League, they're talking about it all the time. These star athletes are stressed, right? And they're coming out and talking about it, and that's a good thing. But I think that there are all kinds of people in industry and in the psychological sciences and in education that are realizing that we really need to dive into this and to talk about it, and there's so many resources. And there's also, I think, in the whole health and wellness, even in the secular arena, in businesses, people are looking and more attentive to their health, whether their diet, exercise, sleep, human relationships, those kinds of things. So there is already sort of a groundswell of happening, and that's where I think I'm most hopeful, because, not to toot our horn, but I think that the anthropology that we understand in the tradition, the intellectual tradition of the Catholic Church, gives us the ideal in Jesus Christ of the human person and human flourishing. And so not only we're very attentive and appreciative of all of the natural elements to good health and flourishing, but also the supernatural, the sacramental life, prayer, spiritual direction, those kinds of things. And there's all kinds of things springing up all over the place, health and wellness programs. And we're trying to get into that space even in our institutions that, insurance can cover, wellness plans, diet, somebody who's really struggling with eating disorder. Well, they don't have to go find out help themselves, that their employer can get them on a program like that. And in the church, in our schools, and in our parishes, Dr. Greg Bottaro, and he's doing a lot of good things. Being Human, he's got a great podcast. There's a lot of podcasts out there. Being Human, Restore the Glory, Bob Schutz and Jake Kim do that. And then, have you heard of this program? It's called Wellness. I think it's called. It's by Jackie Mulligan.
Oh, Reformation.
Reformation.
Yeah.
And she's got this whole kind of 9-point, with the Eucharist in the center, and it's like a monstrance, and there are 9 pillars that come out from the center of Christ in the Eucharist, and it's rest, play, diet, exercise, all these very human things which are centered in Christ. Because as John Paul II says so beautifully, that Jesus Christ is the answer to every human question.
Yeah, and God wants us to love ourselves and love our families. So, taking care of your psychological health is an extension of your spiritual life. Yeah.
It's all part of a whole.
No, I agree. I'm starting to see more of a movement of where the Catholic Church, even down to the parish level, is starting to create opportunities as far as for mental health care of their parishioners. And I think that's so smart, because it's something where if you have like a pastor or a priest that's working with a Catholic mental health professional, it's something where there may be less stigma. They can go to the parish, or they may be able to be seen. There could be, even in our own parish, if we're offering spiritual direction, it could be something the priest offers that too. So you're really getting into more of the mind, the body, and the spirit. So the church is reacting in a way of trying to care, for its flock, which I think is really good, taking that seriously. I think it's important for parents to be able to, almost with an Ignatian sense of spirituality, where a couple, 2-3 times a day, check in with yourself. How is your mental, how are you feeling? And I think that we're talking about distraction, we need to be more aware, more mindful, more in the present moment, in that sense as well too, of how they're actually caring for themselves. That's a great thing, I think, for kids to do too, as much as they can, because when parents lead by example that way too, it also gives the children permission to care for their mental health. I think parents also have, technology-free times of where maybe it's Sunday evenings. We don't have any TV or anything at all. Let's just talk. Let's just play a board game. Let's do something like that as well too. I think it's great because it starts to introduce the sense of silence and being together, or even just the sense of play, how that's some part of what God wants us to be able to do to feel loved and close.
Yeah, I think all of these things are integrated into a whole picture of health. It's not just one thing. Like you work with a lot of seminarians, and I know one of the things I've told our seminarians is, everybody's expected to have a spiritual director. That's sort of a given. There's no shame to that. I said, well, what about, a counselor? Well, I don't need one because, I'm not having any problems. Well, maybe it should be that you should also check in with some mental health, because we all have mental health, and so in other words, you shouldn't be shameful about having to go to counseling. You're not shameful about going to spiritual direction, because it's all part of the whole person. We're mental and physical, body and soul. So the other thing too, I think is very important is, and I kind of write about this in my pastoral letter on Catholic education, is the importance of an experience of beauty in our life. That we should listen to music. I try to listen to a piece of music, to read a poem, to go for a walk outside, and to play with my dog every day. And just those things. And sometimes it's only like 5 minutes. But you have these contact with things that are truly good and beautiful. And that brings joy to your life, And we can get so into our routine that we don't hear any music, we don't, see any animals. Another book I want to plug too is a book called The Last Child in the Woods. Have you heard about this book? And he's a naturalist. He says that, that we need to be outside in nature, and we need to have contact, with trees and with the sky and the stars, and to look up at those things every day. They're right around us, and we can get so tunnel visioned that it's detrimental to our health, our mental health, if we don't.
It introduces the sense of wonder.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's something which is bigger than me, which is beautiful and good.
Right. It takes you out of yourself.
It does, which is so good. And I would encourage, families, parents that may be watching or listening, that they don't have to feel intimidated by this. I think, Bishop Conley, your examples are great. Maybe you don't have an hour or so today or a day like to exercise or to pray or do things. Maybe you have 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, give yourself something good that actually is something you can achieve. Because I think it's something which can feel so intimidating, like the world is going to fall on them. Just start small. Just put one foot in front of the other.
Right.
You're more likely to do something if you start small than if you have a
true.
grand plan
That's
that's
true.
impractical.
And you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
That's true.
Just something good. Just like, a walk around the block.
Mm-hmm.
If it's just 15 minutes, it's just, and that's been proven, that is good for mental health.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, thank you all, Bishop Conley, Virginia, John. Thank you all for being here. And thank you for watching this Mental Health Roundtable. We'll see you next time.